1959, Fidel Castro leads an army of thousands into Havana, forcing out the dictator at the time, and becomes the country's new leader. There are high hopes for the young revolutionary, but almost immediately, confrontation begins with the United States. The U.S. places an embargo on Cuba, and soon after breaks off diplomatic relations. Later, the infamous failed U.S. invasion at the Bay of Pigs. The CIA hatches plots to assassinate Castro, hundreds of plots according to the Cubans, and soon the Soviet Union secretly deploys nuclear missiles to Cuba.
To regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States.
The Cuban Missile Crisis lasts just 2 weeks, but Cuba and the United States remained locked in Cold War tensions for decades. In 1980, an exodus as more than 100,000 Cubans come to the United States after Castro loosens restrictions. 2 decades later, another Cuban leaving by boat, 6-year-old Eli Gonzalez. His arrival in the United States sparks custody battles, which Fidel Castro transforms into a propaganda victory. Fidel Castro said he expected to die in power, but in 2006, a mystery illness forces him to step down. His brother Raul takes over, and in 2015 does what many considered to be unthinkable.
Cuba, a communist regime officially known as Republic of Cuba, is located on the northern Caribbean. During Fidel Castro's, former Prime Minister of Cuba's, nearly 5 decades of rule, Fidel Castro built a repressive system that punished virtually all forms of dissent, a dark legacy that lived on even after his death. Under Fidel Castro, the Cuban government refused to recognize the legitimacy of Cuban human rights organizations, alternative political parties, independent labor unions, or a free press. He also denied international monitors such as the International Committee of the Red Cross and international NGOs like Human Rights Watch access to the island to investigate human rights conditions. Cuban Communist Party's mouthpiece Granma has been a way for Fidel Castro and Cuban Communist Party to communicate their ideology to the world, especially in regards to the United States. Even today, Amnesty International as well as other independent international human rights associations, including UN Special Reporters, are not permitted to access Cuba. The landline, mobile, and internet connections of the government critics, human rights activists, and journalists are often monitored or disabled. Books like Fahrenheit 451 were burnt because they opposed the government's ideas. Other books like Martin Luther King's autobiography, Letters to Soviet Union Leaders by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and even the Constitution of the United States were banned in Cuba. A lot of foreign magazines are also banned here. There were no independent bookshops or bookstores to buy or read the book. In Cuba, one can't listen to independent, private, and foreign broadcasts of radio programs. Cuba's Ministry of Information Technology and Communication reportedly controls the internet in the country, mainly through the state-run Cuban telecommunication company. There is basically a dual system, basically an intranet which is provided to general public with netted content that is subject to authoritative regulations, and the World Wide Web, which is isolated and hidden from the citizens of Cuba. In fact, this ministry offers internet access that only allows users to connect to the websites which have been authorized by the authorities of Cuba for some $0.60 per hour. However, for those who wish to connect to the global internet, the price increases exponentially. Those fees, usually $2 an hour, are exorbitant in a country where majority of formal employees work for the state and earn a mere approximate amount of $30 per month. Based on the law of universal access, this office places particular importance on those measures that seek to ensure that pricing structures are comprehensive so as not to hamper access. Moreover, not all foreign sites are often accessible to the citizens, since authorities have reportedly obstructed access to those considered undesirable for the Cuban public service for the Cuban population is reportedly provided mainly through cyber cafes. Wi Fi hotspots networks can be found in hotels at a price and on terms not affordable to Cubans and in public parks for the price clearly burdensome in view of the average Cuban's income of $2 an hour. Hotspots have also begun to be set up in streets and towns of cities. In public places, the connection is often reported very slow. It is reportedly only available in the provincial capitals and at times known non-conformists are barred from entering. Employees are reportedly able to gain controlled access to the intranet in places of either employment or government institutions. Internet speeds are also reported to be not up to the mark, poor, and average download speed is reportedly 1 Mbps. Hardwire connection, a service also provided by this ministry, is reportedly not attainable to the masses of the Cuban population from their houses. Barely a low of 5% of the population is reported to have a home internet connection, which is very extortionate and often considered as a luxury. In addition to the slender and restricted connectivity in Cuba, internet access and use presents a number of obstacles related to content blocking and censorship. According to different sources, part of content hosted on global internet is not available from Cuba because it is blocked or filtered by the authorities. In some cases, the restrictions are temporary, but others, it has proved to be beyond the bounds of possibility to access website platforms and social networking sites such as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Yahoo, MSN, and Hotmail. One of Havana's residents and Cuba's best known dissent, Joanny Sanchez, started a blog called Generation Y, which was launched on April 9, 2007, in order to provide an insight into daily life in Cuba. However, Sanchez has been harassed, abused, detained, and arrested, and the government even blocked the access to her blog for 3 years. Cuba continues to be the only sovereign state in the hemisphere where there are no assurance for the rights of the right to freedom of expression, a state in which there is resolute and somber failure to discern the essential elements of freedom of expression, representative democracy, and its institution. Despite the years that have passed and the repeated recommendations in this regard, narrow mindedness continues to be convention for the Cuban authorities towards all form of criticism or opposition, and the main constraint to fundamental rights and freedom in Cuba. There have been many protests regarding the freedom of speech. Having cultural geographical diversity in its area, which is in Miami, has always been a hub for anti government voices. The state continues to have exercise a monopoly over media, and it is still hostile to the law to institute private media, all of which is incompatible with international standards of freedom of expression. The selective and deliberate persecution of independent media and journalism continues and even intensifies at times. As extensively portrayed in this report, this maltreatment carried out by state authorities or tolerated by the state takes the form of erratic detentions, threats, and acts of harassment or censorship against journalists who disseminate ideas, opinions, and information crucial of the dominating party. It is also reflected in the multiple acts and threats by authorities and public servants to intimidate anyone who expresses critical ideas about the country's politics and institutions, such as artists, human rights defenders, political dissidents, and others. Today's repressive practices seem to be based on a rationale that is outside the legal framework, but they are far from disappearing. On the contrary, they are strongly replicated in the new media. With respect to the internet, the extremely restrictive and ambiguous legal provisions, the limited connectivity of the Cuban population, and the blocking and censorship of critical media and surveillance seriously impede the exercise of the rights to freedom of expression and privacy on the internet. The Cuban legal system, from the constitution itself to the legal and regulatory provisions, is designed to repress dissent and criticism. Thus, in the opinion of the Office of Special Reporter, the main problem with current legislation is its overtly repressive approach to freedom of expression. Far from protecting the exercise of rights to the freedom of expression and privacy on the internet, the Cuban legal system, from the constitution itself to the legal and regulatory provisions, is designed to repress criticism and dissent. The main problem with current legislation is its repressive way of approach to freedom of expression. Instead of protecting the exercise of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, it provides the state with tools of legality to repress it. It also makes sure of serious discrimination on political grounds in the practice of human rights, as anyone who wants to cite themselves from differently from the socialist regime cannot exercise and use their rights without getting exploited and censored.
Good morning. Our group is made up of Valeria Locio, Andrea Carrasco, Alexandra Noguera, Maria Victoria del Moral, and myself, Jose Chirinos, and we are going to talk to you about censorship in the country of Cuba. Censorship in Cuba is extensive. It has resulted in European Union sanctions from 2003 and 2008, as well as a statement of protest from groups, governments, and noted individuals.
Cuba has ranked low on the Press Freedom Index from Reporters Without Borders from 2002, when the index was established. 134 out of 139 to the present 169 out of 118 in 2015. In 2006, the Inter-American Press Association reported that repression against independent journalists, mistreatment of jail reporters, and very strict government surveillance limiting the people's access to alternative sources of information are continuing.
Cuba has the most restrictive laws on freedom of expression and the press in the Americas. The Constitution prohibits private ownership of media outlets and allows free speech and journalism only if they adhere to the objective of social society.
In the past, books, newspapers, radio channels, television channels, movies, and music were heavily censored and clandestine. Writing was heavily restricted. Also, until recent years, internet access was limited for the vast majority of Cubans.
In recent years, this has changed, with the Cuban public having easy but often expensive access to the internet and mobile phones, with little apparent filtering taking place. Most Cubans access the internet through extremely slow connections. Thank you for your attention.